This is the Nomad Futurist podcast, a podcast about the evolution of technology, society, and transformation. Connect with us, share your thoughts with us at nomadfuturist.com. Let's get this started. Here are Phil and Nabeel.
Hello. Welcome to Nomad Futurist. This is your co-host Nabeel Mahmood from Scottsdale, Arizona. This is your co-host Phillip Koblence from Montclair, New Jersey.
And this is Matt DeMartino from Fairfield, Connecticut.
Brilliant. Matt, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. It's been way past overdue. Lovely to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Before we get started, could you share with our audience at a high level, what do you do?
All right. So the quick elevator pitch. We do recruiting, consulting in the telecommunications and digital infrastructure space, spanning since 1999. I've only been doing it for about 16 years though. So when my father left MCI for greener pastures, decided to start a recruiting firm and realized that in order to grow the business, he needed to enlist his children. So my brother Dominic hopped on in about 2005, 2006. I came on board just after 2009. And we've been doing everything from your traditional ISPs to data center focused type of roles, from your lower level operations all the way to C-suite. So we've been in and around it.
Outstanding. So Phil and I, being in the technical part of the world, we've covered a lot of different sub-verticals within our domain. Human resource and recruitment, this seems to be the first in its own space for us. So could you share with us, how does one get involved in that particular domain, and what experience do you need to become a recruiter?
The first thing you need is a father that opens up a recruiting company.
That does make it a little bit easier, to say the least. Right out of college, so I had dreams and aspirations of joining the political arena, thinking that would be the next path to making this country.
There's still a chance, Matt.
There is still a chance, although it's diminishing as time progresses. But I joined K-Force out of college as the first opportunity. So doing temporary staffing and recruiting. And then at that point, decided I was not a crazy fan of the recruitment world and left to join the military. Realized the military as a full-time thing would be a little bit more, a little bit less enjoyable than I thought it would be. So I came back to what I knew, which was recruiting. Thankfully, I had somebody I knew high up that got me a job, and it's been bliss ever since.
What division in the military did you join?
Force. So Air Force Reserve. I've been stationed at Joint Base McGuire in New Jersey, and now presently at Westover Air Reserve Base up in Springfield, Massachusetts.
So you're still active, or you're still in the active reserve?
It's still active reserve. Actually, this evening, I got to drive up to the military base for the weekend.
Well, thank you for your service.
Thank you for your continued service.
Thank you.
And your previous service. And all the service you will give us in the future.
All right. So how's it been working for your dad?
The beautiful part about working for family is you scream, you yell, you fight, you have lunch, and you kind of rinse, repeat. And then you go home, and it starts a normal family type of dynamic after that. To do it for this many years, it's actually a treat. As much as we complain every once in a while, it's one of the greatest experiences getting to work with your family. We've grown the business pretty significantly, from working on voice-related positions in the early 2000s to high-level data center operations roles, chief revenue officers, chief financial officer positions. I mean, we've pretty much gone up the stack. It's been great leveraging my father's relationships while also forging and building new ones along the way, whether it's in the traditional operator capacity or working with private equity as they start to develop and grow their initiatives and invest in different companies. So it's been a wonderful opportunity, to say the least.
I mean, one of the things that is amazing that I've always tried to kind of articulate my entire career is the concept, you spend so much of your time working that if it doesn't feel kind of matter of fact and it becomes integrated into your life, I know we talk about work-life balance, but if you feel as though you're going to this thing and you're like grinding away for 8 hours a day or 9 hours a day and struggling to get to 5 o'clock so you can leave, it's just miserable. And I think when you have a family business like this, you have no choice but to integrate it into your life. So it just becomes an extension of your regular life. And yes, you spend a lot of your time working, but the distinction between, working and enjoying yourself and all that, you don't have to necessarily ask for time off or anything like that, or you don't have those things. But is that your experience? I mean, you've worked for places before that weren't your family. Is that a distinction that you think is valid?
There's a wonderful benefit to the work-life balance that I enjoy, but you're always on the clock when it's your own business, when it's your client, it's your candidate you're working with. I mean, you have a personal vested interest in this. So I could be in Arizona in 2 months, but I'll be working throughout that. On the flight there, emails, making sure that clients are taken care of, that interviews are going off. It's really 24/7, especially when we have overseas clients we're working with. I can get a message at 2:00 in the morning, it has to be addressed. So yes, it's a little bit unfortunate in certain instances like that. But again, I see the direct returns at the end of it. So it is 100% worth
Do
it.
you think that there is a point in time when that work-life balance, life-work balance line diminishes, whereby it's no longer really work, but you're really enjoying it? It's sort of like playing a sport.
Yep.
Like, have you reached that gray area where it's just texting a buddy? Like, I mean, if you're texting Phil or myself for a job opportunity or
That's never
that
happened with me. The only job opportunity Matt has ever given me is, can you set off a cannon at our golf event?
And you did so well at it, you might get a second phone call.
Exactly. And there's video proof of that. The point that I'm trying to make is, like, both Phil and I, we are on the technical and or the operational end of things. And for me, it's not really work anymore, whereby I'm accessible 24/7. So do you feel that in your journey and your career as it stands, that line has faded, that it's become just part of your life, or just part of your muscle memory?
I would say so. I would tell you in the first 10 years I've been doing this, it wasn't the case. It was work. It was a challenge building up the relationships, building up the network and kind of growing it. The last couple of years, it's really kind of changed quite a bit to the point where I really, truly enjoy what I do. I like the opportunity to text Phil and bust his chops and see what's going on in the industry, or how he can help me out on something, or how I can pretend to help him out on something. But all the conversations I have with people are friendly and open, and it's just enjoyable to work with people now. And I think it's an extension, it's the fruits of the labor from years ago, trying to get to this point where it was always I need to, I was one of Jerry's kids, for lack of better phrases. And it had to kind of get out of that shadow and forge my own path and develop. And it's the same thing with my brother in going through this whole process. It was a struggle for quite some time, and that's when it really did feel like work. But now it's enjoyable. Like I've always said, man, I can't wait till I get to like 60 years old and I can retire. If I'm still doing this at that point in time, if the business is still going, it's going to keep going for as long as possible, because I actually truly enjoy what I do.
Well, you have a roadmap of it, and Jerry does not seem like he's retiring anytime soon.
Despite our best efforts, he's still pressing through it. He's taking more time off, which is what we've encouraged him to do. He'll never step away from the business. For somebody who's been in telecommunications for 50 years, I mean, how do you step away from a constant evolving and everything that's going on from a technology standpoint? It's so fascinating. We would never want to lose him or try to push him out, because we really enjoy what he brings to the table. And from the general humor from day to day, I mean, we need it in the office.
Absolutely. I think that's his life as well, right? So the whole idea of, well, when you cross that line whereby it becomes your life and it's a part of your life, right? I mean, the retirement concept is so dangerous.
It's like saying you retire from living, right? It's
exactly.
Like, it's not
you can die. I mean,
right.
Yeah. Well, that's good. So I think what I got earlier in the conversation when you said the first 10 years were really very challenging, did you find your own identity, you were no longer referred to as Jerry's kid? Was that the turning point where it became passion and part of your life versus just being a job?
I think that's exactly that point. And it was really, a lot of times it was going to conferences kind of, like I said, in that shadow. So the three of us would be going to events, and the introductions were made by him. And a couple of years ago, we made a conscious effort to transition those relationships while building and forging new ones. And that's been critical to my personal development and the growth of the business going forward. I mean, a couple of years ago, we didn't do very much, if anything, in the private equity space. And the last couple of years, that's been where the biggest generator of revenue has come from us. I think it took us way too long to realize trying to break into the individual operator requires a lot of effort. But if you break into the PE group that owns 5 or 6 different subsidiary companies, if you have that internal champion, it makes life a whole lot easier. And that's really helped us develop and grow our business.
What's fascinating is applying a similar metric that you would apply with any product or service, except you're applying it to the distribution of people. And what we've always tried to do is we consider one of the missions originally of the podcast and now the foundation is to kind of humanize our industry, because it's very much, as Nabeel refers to it, Oz behind a curtain. It's just making the internet magically work. And you're at the forefront of humanizing our industry, because you actually have to provide humans to fill these roles. And I think it's not something that people shed a lot of light on. It's a completely unique skill set, a world clearly that you grew up in. But if you look at some of the online platforms that were created over the course of the last, let's call it 25 years, Monster.com and Indeed and all these boards and AI generated resumes and HR departments internally, How have you maintained relevance, and what do you see as a clear differentiator in human recruitment of other humans versus an automated process of filling positions?
It's the human aspect of it at the end of the day. I mean, listen, I've put out postings on Monster for just say a UCAS sales candidate. You will get 200 resumes, one of which might possibly make some sense for what you're trying to do, or at least be worth the conversation. The vetting and screening of the individuals, and listen, somebody can have all the classic skills required for a position, but not being able to vet out the personality standpoint to it. And in the last couple of years, companies have really been talking to us about culture and really driving that home. And for years, I used to think, it's kind of a BS type thing. We have to say it. And as I've been working with some of these clients recently, you get a sense of the type of person that works well with them. You can have the greatest person who has all this experience, but if they can't mesh well with the individuals and take it over, almost make it feel like it's a family type environment, you're never going to win there. So the reality is recruitment's not transactional. And I think that's what those job boards try to make it. But there's so much of a human element to it, to kind of finding out what makes somebody tick. Would they be the right fit for this type of client or another client? And that's what companies come to us for, and frankly pay a commission for, is to have us do a lot of that vetting and screening on the front end. And if there's any concerns or challenges we see, to pull an individual out of that recruitment process. And that is the hardest thing to do, especially when a client likes somebody. And you say, listen, there's something that's popping up or giving me an uneasy feeling. As much as I'd love to place this individual and collect a commission, I have to do right by you, since you're the ones who are writing the check for us at the end of the day.
There's a psychology element to it. I mean, so you have to be part psychologist. And in order to really understand what these clients' needs are, you have to spend time with them. We make fun of, we go to conferences all the time, and me and my damn selfies and the golf events and all these things. How fundamental is that in what you do and spending time and getting to know these groups, so because there are no real KPIs that you can say, what are you looking for in an individual? How will you work well with someone? It's really that feeling that I imagine, takes time to cultivate.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we did a search down in the Gulf Shores down in Alabama. I didn't fly down to Orange Beach as much as I would have loved to for that search, but I was down in Nashville for the Fiber Connect show and met with the CEO of the company. We had a wonderful conversation. I got a real true sense of who that person was and the type of individual they wanted to hire. That's the things you have to do. And that's the reality of it. For years, I never realized how important that was to go to conferences, in the sense of just to be seen in case something pops up. Obviously you have some fruitful meetings, but it's become, in the last couple of years, really focused and driven on understanding the client's needs and understanding the client in general. That's what ultimately leads to a long-term relationship and partnership. Because like I said,
I see a political career here.
Oh, yeah, totally. I mean, bare minimum, a governorship for sure.
Future governor of Connecticut, Matt DeMartino. I can just read people.
Yeah. I see people.
You guys are too kind. I'll give you guys the handout at the end of this.
Right. This is all part of the grip.
Make Connecticut great again. All right.
Please don't do that. Please don't make Connecticut great.
So I get the approach when it comes to understanding the culture from an organizational perspective. As you know, what's been happening in the technology sector with a lot of influx of artificial intelligence and ChatGPT and Gemini and other tools like that, enabling people to do a lot of the grunt work. So for instance, CV writing ends up being that AI-driven process. How do you screen through these 200 applicants that have potentially utilized a tool such as ChatGPT to position and to make sure that they're touching every meta tag and keyword, so on and so forth, to get access to you and or the client? I mean, 200 individuals for one job. I mean, that's a bloody painful process, is what I can imagine.
So the reality is, after all these years, I can skim a resume in probably 5 to 10 seconds to understand if somebody makes sense and at least passes the litmus test to start to move on from there. And if it's someone has so much job movement, or it's just somewhere that's so far away from what the job is actually looking for, you can kind of vet through that fairly quickly. And then I don't think there's too many people that are using ChatGPT for resume writing and content creation. I think a lot of it really comes down to the type of role they're doing. If it's a sales role, most things I want to see are, what have you sold, the types of company you've worked for, so your product set, and financial targets. So seeing that is the best thing that'll help me use that as an identifier to see if you make sense for my client from a sales perspective. If we're looking at something finance related, have you worked on the systems? Have you been involved in the M&A activity, the budgeting, forecasting, modeling? You can kind of see that really quick. a lot of it comes through experience and having seen so many over the years, but that's why we kind of shy away from the job postings, because the last thing I need is those 200 plus things. But when I do post opportunities on LinkedIn, which I do a lot, the biggest thing is responsiveness to individuals and trying to get back to every single person, no matter if they're fit or not. They took the time to read something and reach out to me. And that's where the human factor comes into it. I think it's pretty clear what's gone on in the last 18 months with all the layoffs in the tech industry. It's probably one of the most heartbreaking things to say. The amount of people.
Well, I mean, that seems to be our trend. I mean, like Amazon laid off, 10% of their workforce for the last few months?
Yep.
They overhire and then modulate. And, it almost seems as though, and I'm not saying this is the case, maybe you can determine whether it is the case or not, that these large companies, they don't necessarily appreciate, let's call it, the human impact of hiring someone and the feeling that it makes you feel like when you get hired for a role that presumably is in some cases your dream job. And then a year down the road, 2 years down the road, last one in, first one out in many cases with these layoffs, it's just taken from you and you're left, in the lurch.
I mean, listen, they say therapists have therapists. It's the same thing over here. You have conversations with people and it's just, if I could place people for free to help them out, I would do it. I mean, it is just, the inventory and opportunities is not there like it used to be. And companies are still tight. The hope is that with interest rates coming down, that you're going to see a bit more hiring going into 2025. But man, some of the conversations are tough. And there's so many times where I try to just push somebody in the right direction for a referral. Listen, I'm not recruiting for this company, but reach out to this individual or that one, see if there's anything, get on their radar, anything possible. But it's been rough the last year.
That's a bit counter to what our storyline is in the digital infrastructure space. We are talking about how we're on the precipice of a mass retirement, where 40% of the people have been in the industry for 20 years or more. And we do not have the human capital in order to backfill the positions that are needed in order to develop the gigawatts upon gigawatts of infrastructure that has been signed for. How do you reconcile the idea that in your world, the jobs that you're seeing plentiful enough to make up for the demographic that is disrupted, with this concept that folks are saying that we do not have the human capital to take us into the future in the digital infrastructure industry?
Well, the reality is, from the education standpoint, who goes to college saying I want to be in the telecommunications world? Like, I want to go work in a data center. I mean, there's not a lot of career paths that start there. As we were talking earlier, the military is a great breeding ground for candidates who are retiring, exiting, who have experience in critical facility environments that are fantastic for it. But you can't go to school to get a degree in some type of data center operations. I mean, there's trade schools and vocational stuff, but that's not really pushed. I mean, I remember when I was in high school, BOCES programs, people were frowned on for those. And look at the trades now. I mean, those guys are making phenomenal amounts of money. I can't get a plumber to my house for less than $400 for a phone call. So it starts with the education piece to it, and really pushing people into those career fields.
Yeah, and I think, Phil, back to your point, Phil, the mass hiring and the mass layoffs, I mean, that's typically done by the larger enterprise. And they're only a subset of the larger equation, whereby the 45% threshold still holds for the sector, not necessarily.
No doubt. And I think the issue is where those, like, what verticals, if you will, those layoffs and hirings are happening in. And it's still the more traditional kind of systems administration, these desk jobs that are easy to, I'm going to use the air quotes, easy to expand and detract, because it's really more kind of software oriented, versus the kind of the foundational digital infrastructure building jobs, which, to your point, Matt, those are not the same crossover skill sets. And I think that seems to be the biggest issue. And I think that it's high time for people to recognize that technology in general is not a zero-sum game. There are areas that are growing and there are areas that are ripe for disruption. And a lot of those programmatic jobs, those jobs that, I think traditionally people looked at as their entry point into our space, are the ones that are the easiest to disrupt and the easiest to be disrupted by the ebbs and flows of whether it be AI or kind of software development.
So I can see it from that perspective. A lot of the layoffs that we've been coming across have been more sales, channel focused, marketing. I mean, those are the three biggest ones that typically get hit. I mean, at what point does AI turn a lot of that stuff into fully automated and basically just, hey, here's what I need. I need 300 kW in this exact location, over, done with. I don't need a human aspect to it. This is just what I want. This is what I know. And that's that. I mean, it's near there. I mean, listen, if we can.
Well, I mean, it's like Like the day we actually started virtualizing environments that you don't need somebody to go and provision a server and you can actually just use a VM to commission one, that was one job that was eliminated, right? So that's a continuation and the innovation that's going to happen. But it's also creating more jobs, more on the development part of it.
Yeah, all that's going to do is make it easier to deploy more of those servers, which means we need more of those buildings where those servers go into, right? So theoretically, it's that understanding of the 30,000-foot view and like the way you applied your skill set more broadly and started looking in private equity. That's the way everyone kind of needs to understand how technology works, how all these things work, and where these trends are pushing us. If there's disruption in one area, it's likely because it only means it's going to breed quicker expansion in other areas.
And the hope is that the disruption is short-term for the long-term benefit and gain. But I mean, try and tell that to the longshoremen on the East Coast who are fighting that very battle right now.
They're looking at one wave at a time.
Yep.
Wow.
All right. Switching gears and going back to the AI piece. So with you being involved in recruitment, I'm pretty sure you go and talk and, at a lot of HR conferences with the likes of Monster, Indeed, and other platforms that are readily accessible. Where do you see that AI play as it entails to the hiring of people? I mean, from our end, it looks like there's more and more AI deployment, again, with generative AI and whatnot, and people potentially doing the CVs and so on and so forth. And I've been hearing on the other side of the equation, whereby the HR companies or the HR people or recruiting firms have started to deploy AI to check the resumes and the CVs. Where do you see or what conversations are you having?
Oh my God, are we going to launch DeMartino GPT? DeMartino GPT.
There might be one coming up.
There's going to be no good thoughts in that one. Don't worry. I can't speak with any certainty on that. I mean, we have an AI system that generates and triggers resumes on the basis of a search we have. It's good, but it's not, it's not perfect. And that's a question of whether or not the candidates are the exact match we're trying to do. I mean, it pulls to some degree, but it's not foolproof. In terms of using AI to detect if a resume is fraudulent, the reality is from a lot of the positions I fill, most of those people tend to be on LinkedIn. So you can kind of cross-reference a resume against a LinkedIn profile. And if it's hard to fabricate something on LinkedIn with so many people having eyes on it. Whereas a resume is somewhat private and typically confidential because you don't want the company you're working for getting wind that you're looking. So I don't see that being too much of a concern on our end. There was instances in years past, we used to work for some clients that were contract-based. And a lot of the candidates we'd pull would come from agencies. And you would see that their resumes would pair up one against the other quite similarly. So it made you wonder if someone was actually writing their resumes and if these people actually had the experience they claimed to. And in those certain circumstances, you'd have candidates that would be on site for a couple of weeks before they'd fall off because they weren't qualified. And they're like, well, I guess we're starting to realize that these bench of candidates all have similar resumes and profiles, but don't actually have the same skill set. So there are challenges like that have happened in the past. But in terms of what's happening active with people fabricating stuff using AI and ChatGPT, I can't speak to that with any, with it.
And it's still, you still can't AI that feeling, right? It's not something that you can really wrap yet. I think there is, if you had a piece of machine learning that was following you around, if you had Neuralink implanted in your head, you could probably pretty effectively create some level of AI version of what you're doing that can go to these conferences on your behalf.
But that's only one-way communication, Phil, at the moment.
Right. It's coming. It's coming, man. It's coming.
But you're right, Phil. What we go back to that is you can't solve for the feel of how someone would fit inside an organization and how they would act and engage with the different stakeholders.
People tend to focus on artificial intelligence and that's the brain. There's no artificial gut.
Yeah.
That's the,
there's no substitute for human intelligence. So the human interaction.
Right.
So we just coined the term HI, by the way.
I thought we just coined the term AG, artificial gut. It just doesn't have that same,
gut,
I don't know that there's going to be a big marketing. We'll ask Alyssa if she thinks there's a big marketing push behind gut. Let's go gut.
The other thing is a lot of the candidates that I work with are through referrals. And I always say referrals are our best friends. In all honesty, when someone's vouching for you and says, hey, you need to speak to this individual or that one, or hey, you should speak to Matt DeMartino about some of the opportunities they have. If someone's vouching for you, typically I think our percentage of a candidate working out long-term rises dramatically. versus finding someone randomly through your monster search or a generic LinkedIn approach to candidates.
Yeah, you got to know your people. All right. For our audience, and you've been doing this for 15 and a half, 16 years, what's your advice as it entails to things that you're looking for and or conversation points that they should consider whilst they're looking for a career?
I think the biggest thing, and it kind of goes back to the landscape we're currently in right now, it's stressful times. Everything is quite a bit more expensive. Opportunities are much less at this point in time. It's patience being the biggest focus for individuals. There's times where individuals are rushing into opportunities that aren't the right fit, but are stuck taking a role because of certain financial circumstances and challenges on the home front. There's a process you have to follow, and it's the human piece to all of it is avoiding that gut reaction of rushing into something and taking your time to properly vet. I always tell people, as much as the client's interviewing you for an opportunity, you got to interview them back to make sure that the fit, the culture, compensation plan, everything makes a lot of sense. So opposed to just saying yes to everything or saying the right words just to get the opportunity, because it may not be the right thing for you long term. So I always tell people, spend the time, do due diligence on your end from the conversations you've had, conversations with people in the organization. I've had companies reach out to me and say, hey, why did this individual reach out to some of the people on my team to ask if they can have a conversation about that? I said, wouldn't you want somebody to do that? It shows they're doing their homework. And if you're uncomfortable with that, there's a problem there. Are they trying to, uncover some skeletons in the closet? Like, you would want your team to be forthcoming and open and direct with what's going on.
So on the flip side of that argument, what questions do you advise or would you advise candidates to ask in order to uncover those things, since they're not going to really have the opportunity to get to know your clients in the same way you do on the golf courses and conferences and drinks and dinners and all that?
I always love questions that get people to talk. And the simplest one is, tell me your story. What got you to the position you're in right now? And opening the door to see where that individual was, what it took for them to get to this type of role.
Sounds like you should do a commercial for the Nomad Futurist podcast. I mean, that's what we're doing.
I love those types of discussions. I also tell people, especially if you're applying for a broadband, working with one of the broadband providers, whether it be a leading one or in a rural location, call out the call center, see how they're doing, see how the conversations go, see if someone can assist you, whether they're in your market or not serving that community. Get a feel for the customer service piece, because especially if you're going to have a senior leadership role, that's a huge piece to it. There's a reason why people spend more money to go buy from a different provider than a large one that they have to hit 7 times before they can finally speak to a human person to complain about their bill.
At this point in time, you have made that connection of where this opportunity is.
Correct.
And then, all right, good. So sometimes you just have to slow down to go fast, Phil.
Yeah, it's never actually worked for me, but I get it.
I think it's working all right.
Yeah. What advice would you give besides that? What advice would you give? Because you cover a flutter of opportunities and engagements within the sector, right?
Yeah.
So from telecommunications, sales, marketing, finance, so on and so forth. When you're speaking with these people that are subject matter experts, for starters, how do you expand your knowledge across all of these domains? And what are the things that you're looking for, or what are the key identifiers? And then once you get involved in these conversations, what are the core drivers? Like, I don't know, but like what your level of finance is, or you can talk bits and bytes or whatever the case might be. So how do you carry that conversation and make sure that that's the right fit?
So from the finance side, thankfully, the first job I did was more finance focused and directed. So I can have some of the conversations with that. And it's really in the discussions with the hiring managers for opportunities is what level of, like, for example, I have a CFO search I'm doing right now. Are you looking for someone who's pure financial modeling? Are you looking for somebody who's come through as a functional accountant throughout his career to grow and develop? And from that point, it's utilizing those conversations to determine if somebody hits on the key points we're talking about. And listen, there's only so much I can actually vet before the person that's actually doing the hiring has a greater sense of knowledge of what they're trying to hire for. So it's, can I get them to the table based on the information that I've been able to pull out and let them make that decision? And that's kind of the way we have to operate, because I'm not a CPA. I can't break down your understanding of US GAAP versus IFRS if you're trying to do something international focused. I'm not going to be able to do that. You could tell me yes, and I'm like, listen, I'm going to have to take your word for it, but it comes down to honesty and integrity. If you don't know it, you're just wasting your time and you're wasting the client's time. And that's the biggest.
Well, presumably they'd be able to vet, right? You can't be an expert in every possible role that you're looking for, right? You need to know enough to be dangerous and let your gut, determine whether it's worth having an interview with a client who presumably can vet whether they have expertise that they're looking for.
Yeah. I mean, listen, have I sold SD-WAN or co-location? No, but I'm able to have the conversations around that to get an understanding of the types of clients you've been working with, whether you've been more retail, enterprise, wholesale focused, size of your deal sizes, where at least I have enough of an understanding that I can present to a client. If they decide, hey, this is not the type of person we're looking for, it is what it is. And sometimes I'll push back on a client and say, I think there's something you're missing out of this person where I think you need to have a conversation.
Do you think you need to have interest in the underlying role and what these companies that you're placing for actually do?
100%. Because otherwise you're doing it as a purely transactional basis and it never works. If you're not fully invested or interested in what the product is or what they're trying to sell, it's not that exciting. And we got an opportunity on a hardware side and I typically don't do hardware. After having conversations with the client, I was like, this is something that's really, really interesting. And it's kind of gotten us motivated to kind of split into that segment a little bit more and not just push those opportunities away if they come up, but we have to invest the time. I mean, someone sending a job description saying, can you help us with this? Those are almost never successful searches. We need to have a conversation. I need to get an understanding of what you're looking for. And I need to push back on certain things. If you say, hey, I'm looking for this absolute rock star, which I love when people say that because it's the most frustrating thing ever. But we're looking for this great person. And it's like, here's what we're actually looking
Just email Bon Jovi. Is somebody looking for your role? Hey, John, do you know how to sell SD-WAN?
Dude, it's an expectation where I've had to tell people, I don't think what you're looking for is going to match up to what I think you're going to receive. And I have to be honest with you that I'm not sure if I'm going to be the right one for you.
Rock stars won't take $25K a year. Amazing.
Really not. Yeah.
So did you always have that? Like when you were growing up, were you interested in technology? Was there a lot of technology in your household? Was that something that I know you certainly didn't want to get into recruiting when you were a kid, but was technology always something that you found interested in?
Not really, to be quite honest. I think I just kind of fell into it and just kind of ran with it. I wish I could say otherwise. I think I have the first laptop. I think Jerry had the first Intramail at MCI, but I think technology kind of stopped from the early 90s up until mid 2005, 2006. But yeah, that's really it. We just never big into it. And kind of now I finally got that appetite back to read and learn and understand things a little bit more than just kind of gliding through life. So it's kind of hit big time now.
Is it just you and Dom?
Before it was just politics, Phil. I mean, that was that.
Exactly. It was out of the world. Out of the world.
True honest for politics.
Right. I just wanted to, there is a way for you, because you have to deal with people, there's a way for you to spin that honesty into people are, it's really tough times for people. Things cost a lot of money. Sometimes they take roles that they don't necessarily need. And what we want to instill is patience. In a DeMartino administration, we are going to say, let's make Connecticut patient again. And then boom, that's it. Then you're in office. Oh, I just muted myself. Is it more than you and Dom in the DeMartino household?
No, but just the two of us, obviously with Pops. And then we have 4 or 5 other recruiters that have their own books of business that we share opportunities with and kind of in Canada.
Non-DeMartinos. Oh my God, they're non-DeMartinos.
It's tough to hire people without a vowel ending their last name. So we're kind of struggling with that.
If they do well, does Jerry offer them an adoption?
Listen, everyone can be Jerry's kids. Remember that.
Some of the people that listen to this podcast are a little too young, but you should Google Jerry's kids. It is far beyond just DeMartino. He benefits from it.
I'd like to hear the questions. I like it. So I've got 2 questions for you. One, when we were growing up or got into the sector, there was always this ideal number of a year or 2 that you've got to be at a job before you start looking somewhere else. Mm-hmm. Are we over that, or is there still that number that is looked down upon when people make a transition?
I think there's still that stigma. If you're in sales, you're really looking north of 2 years before you consider a move. Anything less than that, you're kind of perceived as a quota hopper. Now, there's many circumstances and instances where consolidation, rifts that have happened, there's those type of challenges. But when it happens every other year, it creates a pattern that concerns some individuals. Like I said, there's some extraneous factors that you're able to kind of assuage the concerns of a hiring manager for. But I think we're also at a point now where if someone's going to pay me more money, like loyalty to companies like the MCI, Verizon, Sprint people that are there for 20, 30, 40 years, those days are kind of gone. It's get that longevity out of somebody. And it's like, listen, if somebody's paying me more the way things are going now, I got to consider that and make that jump.
So you made a comment earlier about the culture and loyalty also included in the equation. Where do we stand as America versus the rest of the world?
People are willing to leave some on the table for belief that it's a better culture, it's a better environment, flexibility to work from home, be remote a little bit more time. But at the end of the day, cash is king in a lot of instances. In terms of the international markets, I can't give you an honest perspective on that. We don't do as much internationally in recent years as we used to. So I can't give you an honest perspective on that. But I will say, basically North America, I want to believe that everyone subscribes to that nonprofit lifestyle of I'm willing to, for the greater good, leave some on the table, but it has become harder and harder in recent years for that.
Brilliant. Well, we're coming to time over here. Thank you very much for joining us today. It's been wonderful. What advice would you give the younger generation, particularly people that do not know much about the sector? What should they be looking at, and how do they get involved from a recruitment perspective?
I was going to say one, start with a Nomad Futurist. That sounds like a fantastic idea. No, but it really comes down to be curious, ask questions, don't take no for an answer. And the reality is if you're interested in this sector, it's apply. There's all too often, especially in the younger generations, I love that email and I walk away. Hopefully somebody responds and great. If not, whatever, I'll move on to the next thing. But LinkedIn is a phenomenal tool for that, to getting to know people, reaching out to hiring managers, reaching out to HR people, putting in that application, and also following up with the talent acquisition person at a company as an open message to it. The greatest job I had was my first job because it forced me to make phone calls. As much as I hated that job, it was the 100 phone calls a day, 500 phone calls a week, hopefully get 20 decision makers on the phone a day. And 19 out of 20 times they hung up on you. But every once in a while you get that success and it's incredibly rewarding. I was an introvert growing up. Now people can't stop me from talking. I won't shut up. So the greatest thing ever is to get out of that bubble and continue to have those conversations and attempt to try.
I think, again, I'm going to go back to the political campaign, which I assume you will hire me as a campaign manager for.
You'd have been the first one.
I think that was Ted Lasso, right? Be curious, not judgmental. So I appreciate that. What a great slogan.
If that's actually true, I am watching Ted Lasso and it's just subconsciously got in there. So I don't use a whistle anymore. I just say it.
Amazing.
All right. So Matt's not a whistleblower and there's no copyright infringements here. Matt, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. It's been brilliant. Thank you.
Love you, Matt.
Love you, Phil.
This has been great. Nothing lasts forever. Markets will come back, currencies will rebound, businesses will go on, and we will all move on. That could happen next week, next month, or next year. At Nomad Futurist, we're confident that those who prepare rather than panic will come out of this stronger. Thank you for joining us. This has been brought to you by Nomad Futurist. Check us online at nomadfuturist.org. And thank you for listening and subscribing, as well as your continued support.